Welcome to the Bible Forum. I'm Warren Sprouse. It is Sunday night. I think it's August 7th, 11th. I've forgotten now where my date is. We're here together. We're going to spend tonight together. We've got a couple of hours to go. Got a bunch of stuff to talk to you about. I hope you're ready for this. One of the things that came up this week that I wanted to suggest to you is that I received an email that resulted in me trying to log into my personal Facebook page. I was unsuccessful. Apparently I had forgotten the password, or I put it in wrong. I did something. Not really crazy about reading the post at the time. I just deleted the email. In about 10 minutes time, I received a text that read, "Warren, get back on Facebook by clicking and then using the listed URL that started with https://fb.me," and a series of random numbers and letters popped up. That's the technology today. They knew I was having trouble getting in, and they were offering me another way to do it. I'm about that close to canceling my Facebook pages, both of them. I'm getting a little bit leery of Google. I don't know if you've had anything like that or not. We've had a really crazy week. One of the problems that I had this week was whittling things down and throwing stuff out that didn't fit for time's sake. Lots of stuff is happening. A lot of significant things are going on. Reports are surfacing that point to Google's cultural bias against all things conservative. Their desire seems to be making sure that the voices on their network do not threaten those who cannot defend themselves. However, the trend seems to be to limit or to eliminate those voices which say things against the liberal philosophy. And all of this is occurring under the banner of protection. Protecting those who cannot defend themselves. In a recent statement, CNBC noted YouTube recently faced a backlash for suspending the monetization of popular conservative user Steven Crowder. The company later updated its policies by banning content that displays what they call supremacist content, alleging that a group is superior in order to justify discrimination, segregation, or exclusion based on qualities like age, gender, race, caste, religion, sexual orientation, and veteran status. These engines, search engines and such, are becoming very sophisticated, very able to be selective in a very precise and purposeful way. We may find ourselves on the short end of that stick very soon. There's no way to know. On Thursday's Glenn Beck show, Pat Gray and Stu Burgeri, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, filling in for Glenn Beck this week, marveled over a recent story about a millennial writer who had a complete meltdown at work while going over edits with her boss. According to the PJ Media article, a quote, communications and public policy executive, branding consultant, professor writer named Carol Blymeyer took to Twitter to share the minute-by-minute unfolding of a spectacle in which a 20-something writer shouts, cries, and ultimately calls her mother on speakerphone in a common work area, all because her boss informed her gently and politely that there is no letter P in the word hamster. Did you note she's a writer? How'd she get this far? Well, she's also a millennial, which probably answers the question. We don't tell millennials anything that might upset them. Now, most of us, when we say the word aloud, hamster, we appear to be putting the P in that word. But a professional writer has an obligation to spell words correctly, don't they? They used to. We have digital technology to check all of that in a matter of seconds. Now, I read a lot online. I reuse much of what these professional writers are writing. But I can tell you from my own experience, and I'm not an English major, that many of them, most of them, have no idea how to write a story. They state the idea, and then they begin to restate it a second time as they tell the story. And they are often writing on a third grade level, especially if it's TV or cable news people. Now, I know in some circles that's the way to do it. But I'm also a reader, and having to read the same sentence twice in 2 paragraphs is irritating. It's time consuming. Oh, and it also tends to offend my intelligence, such as it is. TheBlaze.com is also reporting that an MSNBC correspondent, his name is Jacob Sobofoff, expressed his bewilderment at the response from El Paso, Texas, from a resident to a visit from President Donald Trump in the wake of that horrible racially motivated attack. The MSNBC anchor Ali Velshi said, quote, "Jacob, you've been in El Paso talking to the community. What's the feeling there about the president's visit?" "Well, Ali," he says, "given the way that the president has talked about how Latinos make up the vast majority of the population of the city of El Paso, surprisingly positive is the way that people are responding here in the wake of the shooting." He said, "I see calls for unity and a great spirit of togetherness." Now, the internet account for the Trump 2020 campaign posted the video of the comments, but Soboroff objected to the editing of the video that cut out the last part of his report. That part where he said El Paso residents were optimistic despite the president's statements. It's getting interesting. Democrat President hopeful Mayor Pete Buttigieg worked closely with a private group signing an executive order requiring local services and institutions such as law enforcement, schools, and water utilities, along with librarians, or libraries, not the librarians, to accept what they all knew were illegal ID cards as a form of valid identification. NBC has reported having the cards created a private group meant the city isn't bound by requests for public records the way the city might be if it were running the program. They're finding ways to get around stuff. Pay attention. We've seen a couple of shootings, serious shootings, in the last week. Here in Charleston, South Carolina area, we've had 5 just in the last week or so. But a list of the people arrested or charged in the 255 mass shootings recorded this year in our country, shootings defined as 4 or more people shot or killed, shows the problem isn't confined to white men or motivations of white supremacy at all. That is the liberal line. That's common knowledge. But if there's a thread, looking at the statistics, it's young men whose biological father was missing in their lives as they were growing up. Now, of course, we can't report stuff like this, can we? After the Parkland school massacre in Florida, the Heritage Foundation cited a study showing that among the 25 most cited school shooters since Columbine, 75% were reared in broken homes. Most, according to psychologist Peter Langman, an expert on school shooters, came from homes that also experienced infidelity, substance abuse, criminal behavior, domestic violence, and child abuse. More than 520 people have died in mass shootings this year, according to the Gun Violence Archive, and at least 2,000 have been injured. The Gateway Pundit noted that more than 140 mass shootings this year remain unsolved, largely because no one will give descriptions to the police. At least 20 of the mass shootings this year were in Chicago. Monday, Senator Elizabeth Warren, a leading 2020 presidential candidate, echoed many of her Democrat colleagues in casting blame on President Trump for the shootings, charging that he's been giving a wink and a nod, along with a smile, to white supremacy. The suspect in the Dayton, Ohio shooting, however, said he was a supporter of Warren and described himself as a socialist. The suspected El Paso shooter clearly portrayed himself as a white supremacist on social media and in his manifesto, but he also espoused progressive ideas such as universal basic income and radical environmentalism. Rival candidate Senator Bernie Sanders explicitly tied the shootings to Trump's language, saying, quote, "The president has to stop the racism and all that xenophobia immediately," end of quote. In a Fox News interview Monday afternoon, Catholic theologian Jonathan Mars said, quote, "White supremacy and racism are consequences of an empty soul." Why? Because you go toward something to fill you up. Human beings were made for love and for purpose. And when we don't find that, we start looking for something else. And white supremacy and racism are cheap substitutes with deadly consequences. A study by the University of Pennsylvania contradicts the establishment media's narrative that racism in America has increased since the election of Donald Trump in 2016. In fact, the panel, which tracked people over a 10-year period, found there has been a decline in white racial prejudice against African Americans and Hispanic Americans since Trump's election. The title of this report is "The Rise of Trump and the Fall of Prejudice: Tracking White Americans' Racial Attitudes 28 to 2018 via a panel survey." The report was authored by Penn political science professor Daniel J. Hopkins and research assistant Samantha Washington. It says, quote, "We find that via most measures, white Americans expressed anti-black and anti-Hispanic prejudice declined after the 26 campaign and election." Hopkins, in an article for 538, explained the study used 13 waves of panel surveys to gather this data. He noted a fall in prejudice was present for both Democrats and Republicans. The study states that Trump's campaign and first few years in office, he, quote, "consistently defied contemporary norms by using explicit negative rhetoric targeting ethnic racial minorities," end of quote. But Hopkins found the president's rhetoric, though he termed it racist, did not result in an increase in racist attitudes among Americans. He said, quote, "We find that via most measures, white Americans expressed anti-black and anti-Hispanic prejudice declined after the 26 campaign and election, and we can rule out even small increases in the expression of prejudice." That, according to the study's abstract. That's not America today, he said. Campus Reform noted the study contradicts ongoing public perception. A 2018 Quinnipiac University poll, for example, found that 55% of survey respondents believe President Trump has emboldened people who hold racist beliefs. Last but not least, here's an update on last week's article on the pastor who walked away from it all. He's the one who wrote the books on dating I told you about last week, divorced his wife, quit his church, and isn't now all that sure about this Christianity thing. Well, he just posted this week, posting about the event on his Instagram stories. This former pastor, Harris, uploaded pictures of himself wearing a gay pride shirt and eating rainbow-colored donuts. He wrote, "Enjoyed swapping stories, gentlemen." Pictured alongside two other men, Matthias Roberts, host of Queerology, a podcast on belief and being, and gay singer Trey Pearson, who is the former frontman for the so-called Christian rock band Every Sunday. This is the guy I told you ditched the conservative evangelical views and openly apologized to the LGBT community for his previous teaching. Writing, quote, "To the LGBTQ plus community, I want to say that I am sorry for the views I taught in my books and as a pastor regarding sexuality," end of quote. In his book, I Kissed Dating Goodbye, Harris put forward a new model for premarital relationships, advocating a type of intentional courtship that is more likely to end in marriage. In his previous life as a pastor and evangelical author, Harris confirmed that homosexual relationships were sinful according to the Bible. Clearly, he no longer holds to this belief, but then he no longer holds to the Bible either. Writing to the homosexual community, he says, quote, "I regret standing against marriage equality, for not affirming you and your place in the church, and for any ways that my writing and speaking contributed to a culture of exclusion and bigotry. I hope you can forgive me." You see, in the initial outing of this thing, explaining I'm leaving my church, I'm leaving my wife, blah, 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 he didn't say anything about his homosexuality. He did apologize for being overtly not for it, but now he's hanging out with them. I say stay tuned. It won't be long before we will probably read of his marriage to one of these men. You live a little while on the planet, you realize that people do things for a reason. Not always the reason they tell you, but there's always a reason. When we read about this guy throwing away 30, 40 years, whatever it was, of Christianity and ministry and family, I think it was 25 years, you had to wonder why. Now we know.